Ladies and gentlemen, we have major numbers from the reported college football realignment. How does this expansion of the Big Ten and the SEC shift the overall revenue each of these college teams are going to be taking in over the next decade? We've got a full spreadsheet. As you can see from this reputable source, he says, I reworked all of the conference payout projections from the March 22nd report, with USC and UCLA moving from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten starting in 2024. The main takeaways: the Big Ten would surpass the SEC in total revenue with this expansion to 16 teams. The ACC and the Big 12 would be about 50% of the Big Two. The Pac-12 would be about 20 million plus behind both the Big 12 and the ACC. And guys, this is the actual spreadsheet, super in-depth. It's year by year. And the one thing that I saw right off the bat, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are right next to each other. Look at the difference in total revenue in the year 2029 per year. Each of these, every college team in in the Big Ten in 2029 projected to make $130 million, right around 129.4, compared to the Pac-12, 34. That's a difference of almost $100 million. And you can kind of see the comparison, the Big Ten versus the SEC. The Big Ten looks like they're taking in around 10 to 12 million more per year with their current 16-team expansion versus the SEC's potential 16-team expansion. The Pac-12 is laughably behind, and this is one of the major reasons why teams like Washington and Oregon are desperate and practically begging the Big Ten to join. This revenue difference is ridiculous. It's almost $100 million at this point by the year 2029. And you can see the ACC versus the Big 12 with all of their teams. The ACC still a little bit higher than the Big 12. That's mainly due to the ACC still having Clemson, still having Miami, still having FSU. They have more top-end teams than the Big 12 currently. And the thought process, even if the Big 12 adds Arizona State, Colorado, that's really not going to up their revenue too much. The reason they would add those teams would be to stay relevant and to be the third quote-unquote super conference in college football. It wouldn't be a revenue thing. Like adding Arizona and Arizona State won't bump the Big 12 like 20 million per year. What it would do is it would give their conference more credibility. It would make more good matchups or more important matchups, and it would get them, theoretically better ratings with more good teams in the conference. But this stuff is so crazy, and you can even see the projected numbers, in the Big Ten and the SEC without either of the additions this coming year. In 2022, the Big Ten stands to make $57 million. The SEC is at $54 million. So the SEC, when it comes to, on the field, is definitely the best conference in college football. But if people are surprised that the Big Ten is taking in more money than the SEC, you're not paying attention. Ohio State has the biggest fan base in college football. Michigan is top 5. Penn State is top 10. These are extreme fan bases. It's not surprising the Big Ten makes slightly more than the SEC. And then when USC and UCLA come to the Big Ten, it's going to be worth a little bit more than Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC. Although Texas is going to be crazy. They bring in a ton of revenue. So that is a great model and something crazy to look at. That shows you why Oregon would love to be in the Big Ten. They would love it. And we heard the report yesterday that Oregon's chances of getting into the Big Ten, they're like 1% at this point. If Notre Dame goes to the Big Ten, they're taking Stanford with them, apparently. That's the rumor. And we've also got a rumor on SMU that's going around. It says, my only comment on reports that SMU is talking. So SMU apparently is talking right now to the ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12. Of course they are. Everyone is talking to another conference. West Virginia has had multiple talks with the ACC, Big Ten, and the SEC. Yeah, that doesn't mean anything. West Virginia's not joining the Big Ten. But yeah, so SMU, he also says, I do think SMU could potentially get into a gutted Pac-12. So that would be assuming the Pac-12 loses teams to the Big 12, and then they would try and make that up by taking a team like SMU just to keep the conference alive. So very interesting. SMU reportedly talking to teams, but everyone is doing this right now. It literally is a mad scramble. We've also got another report. The Big 12 just may add those three and stop to wait and see what happens 5 to 10 years from now. So the three teams he's referencing are Arizona, Arizona State, and Colorado. Adding those teams and then stopping. I don't think this is correct because you would be at an odd number of teams. If you're adding 3 teams, that takes you to 15 teams. You're at an odd number. You need to add one more in that scenario. And then it says there's no reason to add anyone else to dilute the TV money just to have an even... Oh, okay, so he says you don't even need an even number, and it would dilute the TV number because if you bring in another team, they would have to get their cut of conference TV revenue. So it would bring all the other members down with how much money they got because you would have to be giving the 16th member some of that money, an equal share, so to speak, which would dilute it. Basically, that's what it is. So that's very interesting. You know, if they stay at 15, I don't like that personally. I don't like the idea of having a conference with an odd number of teams just because you're not going to make as much revenue. But, you know, maybe they could just say Arizona, Arizona State, and Colorado. If that happens, I don't really think the Big 12 gains all that much relevancy with those 3 teams. I mean, if you also add Utah, which was the original rumor, it was 4 teams, but now Utah is getting cold feet. Those 3 teams really don't move the needle for me, honestly. Also, we've got from my source in West Virginia, CBS is making it known to your mark that they will beat what ESPN will offer our Tier 1 media package. So it looks like CBS is making a play for the Big 12. This is very interesting. It's the package they want the most, and they are even looking at airing weeknight games in primetime slots. So this is major news. CBS possibly gaining the Tier 1 rights to the Big 12 and then having weeknight primetime games, Big 12 matchups, possibly Wednesday night games, Friday night games, Thursday night games. Who knows? Very interesting. See, because right now, guys, what we're looking at when it comes to the TV stuff, ESPN is going to have the SEC, Fox is going to have the Big 10, and, you know, the Big 12 is kind of open to anyone. CBS looks like they're making a play. Also, it's looking more and more likely the only one who wants the Pac-12 is ESPN because they want the late night windows, reportedly. They want to air games late at night, and you would have to do it with the Pac-12. So they're really the only ones interested in the Pac-12. We've also got some comments from the new Big 12, commissioner. One thing is for sure. The Big 12 is open for business. We will leave no stone unturned to drive the value of the conference. So this is something that's been said multiple times. The Big 12 is aggressively looking to expand, and the most likely scenario right now is Arizona, Arizona State, and Colorado going from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. The Big 10 is staying pat. If Notre Dame wants to join the Big 10 in 2025, they would also offer the second slot, which would be the 18th spot in the conference, to Stanford. And if Stanford declines it for whatever reason, they would offer the slot to Washington. So that is the report on that, and that makes major issues for a team like Oregon. I think worst case scenario, I mean, there's multiple things that could happen. The one interesting thing, what happens to the ACC? The ACC, there's so many unknowns right now. Like, my thing is, I feel like the SEC would have a response if the Big Ten does add Notre Dame and Stanford. But I'm getting too far ahead of myself because really this summer, the only thing I expect to happen this summer and possibly late July, early August is the 3 teams that we've discussed. And then next summer we could get more movement. But right now the ACC is holding on. They've got that horrible TV contract through 2036. They're hoping that'll keep their conference together. The Pac-12, if they lose those 3 teams, you could say, yeah, but we still have Oregon and Washington. Let's just add SMU, Fresno State, and San Diego State and try and preserve the conference. So that's a possibility. But guys, the Big 12 aggressively trying to expand. They want to be known as the 3rd super conference. They want staying power. They want relevancy in college football. And that overall spreadsheet we looked at, we'll show it again because it's just so remarkable. We might as well full screen it so you guys can just look over this and see in 2022 the difference between the Big Ten and the Pac-12 is about, looks like $23 million. That's part of the reason USC and UCLA said, let's get out of here. Let's go add to their, because they're also getting a new TV deal, by the way, guys, the Big Ten is. That's why it shoots up from $58 million to $89. It's not just the addition of USC and UCLA. It's also the new TV deal starting. And then looking at the SEC, you can see their new TV deal, 57 to 74, and then you add Oklahoma and Texas in 2025, and it goes over 100 million in the conference. Also, it's important to note, Notre Dame as an independent right now reportedly is making around, I think, a total of $30 million per year versus a team. It is crazy. Like, Notre Dame is making $30 million per year on their TV deal versus a team like Rutgers, who gets $57 million because they're in the Big Ten. Maryland gets 50. You'd think these teams would have better facilities if they're making this kind of money. But all the other sports operate at a negative, so it's tough. But yeah, this is a crazy graph. And then there's the Big 12. Adding more teams to the Big 12, you know, it's not going to increase it a ton, but it'll help it a little bit. And then looking at the ACC, you can see, you know, the ACC right now is slightly more than the Big, or it's going to be more, I think. Yeah, so the ACC has such a horrible deal. Oh my goodness, they have a horrible deal. You would think the ACC with Clemson, with Miami, with Florida State, they'd be more, you know, in the year 2029, they're only at 61 million. They're not even in the same stratosphere as the Big Ten or the SEC. So this graph really lays out and shows the drastic difference between the 2 super conferences and everyone else. And even if the Big 12 becomes the quote-unquote 3rd super conference, it's not going to affect the revenue very much because the Big 10 and the SEC already took all the good teams. They took the best teams already. The only teams left in these conferences when looking, you know, the Big 12, who's the best team in the Big 12 left? Once Oklahoma and Texas go to the SEC, who's the super team in that conference? Who's the super team in the Pac-12? Oregon? Like, they took USC. They took Texas. Those are the 2 big schools. They got taken. And then Oklahoma also got taken as well. So they poached the best schools, and it's so unequal right now. Nobody really knows what's going to happen, but guys, we will continue to follow it. I wanted to update the total numbers. These are just projections. They're not exact. Things still have to be negotiated, but it gives you at least a rough estimate on how crazy the differences are overall as we continue to follow this absolutely breaking story on college football realignment, guys. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.